Welcome to the Rex Sanders Show. Glad to have you with us. If you are a new listener, welcome to the conversation. Don't forget to do a couple things. Leave us comments. We love those. Also, we're not ashamed or bashful. We will beg for stars. So if you like what we're doing, please hit us up with 5 stars. And then the last thing, of course, go ahead and subscribe so you can get all of our latest episodes. All right. I want to thank everybody who is continuing to listen to us. We are listened to in 32 countries and over 500 cities. And I would like to recognize our listeners in Hamden, Connecticut today. So welcome to the show, those folks in Hamden. Hamden's just outside of New Haven, if you're not familiar with that. So welcome to the program. We are thankful for your listening audience participation because there are so many choices out there in the marketplace today. There are 2.4 million active podcasts with over 120 million episodes. So pretty excited to have you with us, and thank you for your loyal listenership. All right, as you know, the show is all about biographies, people's stories, interesting people doing interesting things. I just love to study the human condition, and so we've got another great story for you today. So sit back, buckle up, and let's go have a quick conversation. So really excited about today's guest, and when I booked her, very interesting profile. And so going to introduce you to our guest. She is a mother, which is actually one of the most important roles we'll ever play. So that's a wonderful thing. And she's a recent mother of a new one here during the pandemic. So that's pretty neat. She is a travel blogger. Well, she's a little bit setting that aside because, we can't quite travel like we did last year. And then she's some very interesting things. She's a hyperpolyglot, okay? And for those that don't understand what a hyperpolyglot is, they can speak more than 6 languages. So she might just go off on us and we'll be all sitting here not understanding what she's saying. And then lastly, too, she's a language acquisitionist. And so she really understands speaking and communication. So I'd like to welcome to the show this morning, Sarah Tavin. Sarah, how are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you this morning?
Fantastic. It's hot here I'm just outside of Boulder, and it went from spring to summer in one hop. So it's a little warm this morning.
Yeah, I feel you. I'm just outside of Minneapolis, and we're sitting in that heat as well.
Oh, it's crazy. But it's good to have spring and green, and it's good to be transitioning to a new season. All right, so Sarah, we like to understand your story, the backstory to all of this, as people might say these days. So we're going to go through your history. Now, I'm going to throw out a whole list of questions. Don't worry, I will throw them out, so you don't have to write them down. Okay. So we want to go back to the beginning of time. Where were you born? And then we want to also hopscotch up to where were you raised? Because that could be different. I had a guest on the show, Sonja Ellie, who actually had been on, she's moved 63 times before the age of 15.
Wow.
So big influence in her life. We'd like to understand if you have peers and siblings, and if you have siblings, if any of them survived your harassment. We want to know, what are the things you did when you weren't in school growing up? So your interest, whether that was sports or computers, dance, theater, reading, whatever it happened to be, heck, even shoplifting. And don't laugh at that, because I had a guest on the show, Larry Cole, who actually, by the time he was 15, was a car thief. Wow. So lots of interesting things. Then we want to know about your parents. Parental influence is huge. I've kind of found 3 buckets when I've interviewed these hundreds of people on the show. There tend to be, the first bucket is those supportive parents. They were well engaged in life. They were the launching pad into all kinds of success. Then there's sort of in the middle, which is what I would call semi-participatory, which it really isn't a word, but I'm going to use it. The parents who were working their tails off to eat, to provide for their families, and they just probably didn't have the time to invest in their kids. And then there's the last bucket, which I really struggle with, is the bucket where there were horrible conditions. There might have been abuse or extreme poverty or things like that. And it motivated the kids to say to themselves, I don't want anything to be like that. So Then we'll hop around your education and talk about some pivot points, and then
Mhm.
talk about what you're doing today. So
Cool.
you've got some interesting titles, the first ever on the show for that. So let's start in the beginning. Sarah, where were you born?
So I was born on a SAC Air Force Base just outside of Omaha. My
Okay,
mom was uh, military Air Force intelligence. Basically, she was a computer specialist in the early days of that being a thing. So she was on the base. My dad was civilian. He was actually in college at the time that I was born. And so, yeah, it was just, small town Nebraska. Most people in our community were military affiliated. And so, yeah, I was there then until I was 10. And
okay.
then we moved on from there. But yeah, so my early years were in kind of a suburban Nebraska.
Wow, suburban Nebraska. My mom's family is all from Nebraska, but the
Oh,
northern
cool.
end.
Hmm.
But Omaha, that is in the summertime when it's just severely hot and severely
Hmm.
humid. Whew,
Yeah, yeah.
that's a rough place. Now, do you call Omaha home, or what was your next step after 10?
So when I was 10, so my parents actually when I was 6, they divorced,
Okay,
and then but they stayed very amicable throughout. I think they just really needed some time to grow as individuals, and then they
sure.
remarried each other at when I was 10. So the same two parents divorced and then remarried each other.
Wow.
Uh, One of my dad's conditions, though, he's Californian, not Nebraskan, and one of his conditions was that he never be made to live in Nebraska again. So at that point, we moved to St. Louis.
St. Louis. Okay.
Yeah, which is
No,
where he
no,
had
wait
been.
a minute. St. Louis and southeastern Nebraska, that's not a huge difference.
Not a huge difference, no, but I think he liked he'd gone and established himself in St. Louis and really felt at home in that community. So we
Hmm,
moved there for a little
fair enough.
while. Yeah. It was a fairly short but eventful time in St. Louis. I don't know if you remember the great flood of '93, the Mississippi
Yep.
flooded, and our house was taken at that time.
Wow.
So we moved to kind of further out in the suburbs of St. Louis for another couple of years, but then moved down after that. At this point, my mom had long since left the military, and so she was an executive with Walmart, and so we moved down to Arkansas.
Oh, wow. So were you down in Bentonville or Hope? Where were you living?
We were in Bentonville. Well, so we actually lived in Rogers, but
Okay.
yes,
Yeah.
she worked in Bentonville. Hmm.
Okay. Well, I've been to Bentonville more times than I care to
Really?
admit, and Bentonville has the airport that Walmart built. So
Yes, it does.
yeah, fun
Yeah.
little airport. So where do you call home? I mean, you had stops in Omaha, St. Louis, and then
Mhm.
Arkansas. Well, where in your mind, if someone asks you where's home, Sarah, where's home in your
Yeah.
mind?
Yeah, so that's kind of a complicated one for me because I did do my undergraduate and my first master's at the University of Arkansas. So I would say technically the place I lived the longest would be Arkansas.
Okay.
But during and after college, I then started moving quite regularly through Europe and then further afield, teaching internationally. And so I was always kind of living in different places and I think I kind of developed the mentality of home is where I am at that
Okay.
moment. So right
Fantastic.
now I would say Minneapolis is home, and then on the flip side, it's all of them. If depending on the conversation, if I'm speaking to somebody from Nebraska, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's home. That's
Yeah.
where I'm from. So it's kind of a great way to connect with people. I like to connect, and
Okay.
so it's been an opportunity to have more in common with more people.
So that's great. So let me stop it right here for a second. And
Hmm.
we have a lot of people who listen along with us. And
Hmm.
so, can you throw out a website or social media or both where people can connect with you because they
Hmm.
might be following along as we're talking this morning?
Yeah. So I have two websites that kind of are two different facets of what I do. So there's chooseyourlifeadventure.com. That's just
Okay.
all one word, chooseyourlifeadventure.com. And that's where I talk more about like my travel experiences, my travel advice. That's kind of more travel themed. And then
Okay.
you can also find me on Polyglot and Tot. So that's POLYGLOT ANDTOT, polyglotandtot.com. And that's where I talk about language learning and how to raise multilingual children.
Fantastic. Okay, let's get back to our fun part of the story here. Do you have siblings?
I do. I have a sister. She is my favorite person outside of my daughter.
Okay.
She's my favorite person. We're super close. We were not close as kids. We fought like cats and dogs as children, but then as adults, we've just become very, very close.
Well, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you. How was the relationship with your sister?
Yeah. As kids, I mean, sibling rivalry. So there was a lot of the, brawling and, she's looking at me, she stole my doll, but as
Yeah.
adults, we're tight.
What's the age difference between the two of you?
So I'm the older. She's probably the more mature though. She's just really brilliant. And but she's 3.5, 3 3/4 years younger than me.
Oh, that's a good spread. That's a good
Yeah.
spread. Okay, so we learned about your mom being in the military and being the intelligence specialist. What type of work did your dad do?
Yeah, so he majored in business and he did insurance for quite a long time. I don't know exactly how many years. I want to say it was like 15 plus years. And then his original degree though was real estate. So he switched back to real estate for a long time. And now he's retired. And so he does community involvement and that sort of thing, has done that he's also a writer and photographer. So he still does some of that as well.
Nice. Okay, so when you weren't in school and fighting with your sister, what types of things were you interested, or what did you do as a kid?
So I'm a book nerd. I love to read. So you could often find me. That was actually how my parents rewarded my report cards, was you got a book for each A, that sort of thing. I also was, I was just really super involved and my parents supported that. I wanted to try all the things. So I did, I tried each of the sports. I took swimming, I took art, I was in the church choir, I did Girl Scouts, all the different classes.
Okay.
I did start languages at age 7 already. I started with a French tutor when I was 7. And then there was a really cool organization in Omaha. I hope it's still there. It was called Emily Gifford Children's Theater. And they had classes on acting,
Okay.
starting at I think I took my first one at age 4. And so I did some of that as well.
Okay, fantastic. So after you graduated from high school, what was your next hop?
I attended the University of Arkansas
Okay.
on the Bodenhammer Fellowship to study European studies and German.
Okay. So did you get your degrees in those languages then?
I did, yeah. While in college, I started taking, I started taking multiple languages already in high school, but in college, I initially intended to major in French. However, I had excellent advisors, just 2 really great professors who I'm still in contact with them today. And they made the valid point that there are a lot more French majors than there are German majors. And since I speak both languages, they encouraged me to pursue German as my primary, because that would open more doors for future study scholarships and job opportunities, that sort of thing.
All right. So being a hyperpolyglot, what languages do you speak?
So English is obviously my native language. My next most fluent would be German. I have a master's degree in German language and literature. And then I started French at 7 and I continued it through most of my youth. So that's probably my next most fluent language. And then let's see, in Arkansas, my community was about 50% native Spanish speaker. So I picked up Spanish in the community and took some classes. I speak Mandarin, Japanese. Let's see, so English, German, French, Spanish, Mandarin, Japanese. And then my current weakest 2 languages are Arabic and Hindi. Those are some that I started later and are a little more complicated. So my level on those is a little lower. And then I've studied quite a few others, but more in a travel capacity. So I don't count them in my language count. They're more of just understanding enough to order food and stuff.
Order food, where's the bus, where's the airport, stuff like that. So, wow, that's incredible. Now, I want to ask you a question because it's really different today than probably when you or I were in college. Did you think of what type of career you were going to do with, a major in German?
Yeah. So initially, the reason that co-majored, I double majored in European studies and international relations was because the language major was for interest. I've a lifelong interest in languages, but I did not necessarily intend to focus on a career in languages. I had considered doing, like UN translation work or something, but I knew that the pay for that was really low.
Okay.
So my goal was to major in those languages with the original idea of working with the CIA and eventually the State Department.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah.
Was your mom's time in the military an influence on that, or how did you
Potentially.
get there?
Yeah. So potentially, she definitely, when I was in high school doing college visits, we definitely went out to the Air Force Academy out there, which is, I don't know, you're probably nearby, so
Sure,
maybe you
absolutely.
visited. Gorgeous campus, really
Yes.
just a cool place.
Yeah.
But I am a little bit too stubborn to take orders well. So
Okay.
I ultimately decided that I just wouldn't be a fit for that. But I knew that I was interested in something international.
Okay.
And so I kind of was looking at all my options. And, when you're in high school, they tell you a lot of on career day, it's like teacher, police officer,
Sure. Yeah.
they don't really get into the specifics of what you could do with an international interest.
Right.
So the only thing I could really come up with was something governmental. And at that point, I still didn't really know much about non-governmental organizations,
Mm-hmm.
but I was in Model UN in high school, so I knew, about
A
that
little bit. Sure.
thing. Yeah. So I knew I wanted to do something with either the government or the UN at that point in time.
That's neat. Anybody who has not been to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs,
Mhm.
it's a great place to visit. And it's one of the most unique places in the world to watch a football game. I've been down there many times. The
Yeah,
stadium is
sure.
great.
I believe that. Yeah, I vaguely remember the stadium. It would be gorgeous.
Yeah, well, against the Rockies right there. And then
Mhm.
they fly the huge Air Force planes over the stadium when the game kicks off. I mean, it's
Oh,
not
cool.
it's not just the fighter jets. I mean, you see some huge planes, and I'm not a
Yeah,
plane aficionado, but great place to stop. So
cool.
I have this question because I was one of these knuckleheads that took Latin in high school.
hmm
Okay.
hmm
Now, I can't even remember my friend how he convinced me to take Latin. And wow, it was quite an experience. But we had this Latin teacher who was fresh from Italy. Okay,
Okay,
and he
cool.
he knew. Now, the one thing that helps from Latin is I'm pretty good at reading prescription labels because
Sure.
a lot of things are written in that. But
hmm
Latin is the foundation of the Romance languages. Okay,
Right.
and
hmm
so if you know some Latin, then it's a little easier to pick up other languages. Now,
hmm
you stepped outside Romance languages in a big way with learning, Arabic, Hindi, and some of these other, Mandarin. I mean, those
hmm
are completely different, I would say, brain programming to
Sure.
learn those.
Yeah.
So how hard has it been to pick up, say, Mandarin?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get that a lot. And most people assume Mandarin would be the most difficult. So Mandarin, actually, I had always intended to learn it. How I got there, though, it was I was in college. I dated and briefly married somebody who was a native speaker of
Okay,
Mandarin. So, but I actually did not. So I did my junior year abroad in Austria,
okay,
where the main language is German. And so I was
sure.
attending college or university in German,
Hmm.
and I decided that I wanted to surprise him when I returned home and by knowing his family's language. And so I took Mandarin classes in Austria, which was kind of complicated because the textbook and the instruction was in German. So, in my head, I
Ah,
had to translate the Mandarin into German and then the German back into English. Um,
wow.
so I think some of my Mandarin kind of got flavored with that. But if your goal is to speak Mandarin and understand Mandarin, it's really not that difficult. So where
Okay,
many people have difficulty with Mandarin is because of the character system. Unlike many or most other languages, they do not have an alphabet type
right.
system.
Right.
It's the pictorial.
Pictorial.
So to be literate, you have to learn like 5,000 characters,
Wow.
which is an intimidating thing
Yeah.
for many people. But if you leave that aside, so Mandarin Chinese is tonal, which is a little complicated. But other than that, there's almost no grammar. So where a lot of, like, if you're thinking about, when you're learning Latin or, a Romance language, and you have to learn how to conjugate the verb, like if
Correct. Proper
a,
placement of it, all that good stuff. Right.
exactly. The adjectives have to match the gender. It's so,
yes.
Mandarin has none of that. It's basically she eat food. And that makes it so much easier. If you want to change the tense, even, you still don't do much to the verb. You just add like a little particle at the end. So it's incredibly simple grammatically.
Mm-hmm.
I think we get intimidated by Mandarin because of the characters, and then because of the tones. But the tones, if you just spend like a week on those,
Mm-hmm.
you can get it pretty easily. It's hard for us to necessarily, sometimes it's hard to reproduce it or, remember, like, oh,
Sure.
I have to go up on this tone. But yeah, otherwise Mandarin's pretty easy. Now, the other languages, Japan is grammatically complex. So
Okay.
that one's been a little, not Japan, Japanese. And then Hindi, Hindi's not been too bad, although the writing, the Devanagari script has really thrown me for a loop on the Hindi. Arabic, though, each month I focus on one of the languages to kind of develop my skill level a little more. This month happens to be Arabic month, and I would say Arabic has been my most challenging language. There is just so much complexity. The verb conjugation system is unlike any
Right.
system that I've ever seen before. You do have the added levels of genders, and not just like item gender, but if you are, as a woman, I would say things differently than you would as a man. And it's so, and then if the writing system is also, the script is, it can be confusing as well. So I would say Arabic has been more difficult, and it was definitely easier for me as a native English speaker to start with the Romance, the European languages, because they are closer to my native language.
It's funny when you said conjugate,
Mm-hmm.
I literally had a flashback to high school Latin.
I'm sure.
I don't think I've heard anybody, maybe in the college class, but I mean, I literally just went back to my Latin class and his heavy Italian accent.
Mm-hmm.
So he said it, and I can't even really put it out. I mean, to do it. So yes, I just conjugate. That's going to be my word of my day today.
Word of the day.
I'm going to throw it in sentences where it has no meaning, no place.
Exactly.
Hey, would you like to conjugate over in my yard? All right. So fantastic. Now, have you been able to travel and use these languages, or is there a practical, obviously you were in school in Germany. I mean, I get that. Okay. Then you had the motivation to speak Mandarin because your, boyfriend and husband was fluent Mandarin. What about the other languages? Did you have a chance to apply them?
Yeah. So my reason for learning French was because my parents found a local tutor for that. So I started in French, and that's what also piqued my interest in travel.
Mm-hmm.
So I always wanted to live and work in Paris and all of that. Interestingly, though, I have never lived in a French-speaking community. So I've traveled extensively while I was living. So I did. I traveled to Europe occasionally with my parents, my family in high school, but my after my freshman year of college, I took an internship in Switzerland.
Okay.
And so I worked for a supermarket in just outside of Zurich on the Lake Constance, and spoke, well, I won't say German. Swiss German is an entirely different thing.
Yes.
But I spoke, a combination of Swiss German, and French. I would have they travel, so there was a lot of French speakers coming through in that circumstance. And then I later so my junior year, I lived in Austria, did university in Austria.
Yep.
So that's mostly German. I'm trying to think. Spanish was really just my community in Arkansas was, all of our high school announcements were in both languages. There were, I won't say as many, but the number of courses taught in Spanish for native Spanish speakers was almost equal to the number of English speaking classes.
Sure.
So it was just kind of like an immersive environment. The Mandarin, like I said, was from that connection. Let's see, Japanese, I taught for a period in just outside of Tokyo.
Okay.
So I lived there, loved that experience. The Arabic, I lived and taught in Oman on the Arabian Peninsula for a couple of years. And the Hindi comes from, so when my mother was in high school, she visited India, loved the experience. And so I grew up kind of with her stories of India. And she always said that we were going to go visit India together. So I kind of romanticized India my entire life, grew up loving Bollywood and all that sort of thing.
Sure.
And so the Hindi was exclusively just because of that interest. I did do an internship in Nepal. Nepali is not the same language, but there are a lot of crossover similarities. And so I think after that time in Nepal, that kind of also accelerated my interest in Hindi as well.
Fantastic. So you've been all over the world. What type of jobs were you doing? I know you told us that you were teaching in Tokyo. What types of jobs were you doing to support yourself when you were living in all these places?
Yeah. So in Oman and Japan, I was teaching at local colleges. So I was a member of the English department. Or in Japan, it was actually like a separate, specialized English department. And then I lived in, let's see, so the earlier the European stuff was study abroad in college.
Okay, right.
And then I lived when I was in Nepal, that was a photojournalism internship.
Okay.
And then I also lived in Thailand and Sri Lanka as a digital nomad.
Okay.
So I have a freelance copywriting, editing business, and also I do freelance consulting with nonprofits.
Oh, wow.
And so that's, from my computer. I was remote before we all became remote.
Yeah.
And so I would just live in Thailand, sit on a beach and have my delicious fried rice and edit my papers from there.
Fantastic. So quick question for you. When you look back on all the places you've been, where was one of your favorites?
So it's one of those things that it kind of depends on my mood. I really love Japan for a lot of reasons, and it's kind of my favorite language to work on right now.
Okay.
So I enjoyed that quite a lot. It was at a kind of a difficult juncture in life. So, there were some other factors involved, but I really loved that experience. I love the Himalayas. I've been trekking in the Himalayas multiple times, done the Everest base camp, Annapurna base camp type stuff.
Yeah.
So that place holds a special place in my heart. I didn't live there as long. It was, like a month-long internship, and then I came back to visit other times. But I would say those two are probably my favorite. And now by the time I left Oman, I hated it. I didn't want to go back. But then as soon as I left, I missed it. And it's actually the place that I talk about the most these days. I'm constantly I'm just itching to go back for a visit. And that's probably one of the first international trips that my daughter will go on is I want to go back. When I left, it was just frustration as somebody who's not grown up in it. Living in that kind of desert heat was intense. So, I was fed up with a couple of things, but as soon as I left, I was like, the quality of life I had in Oman was, I wish I could get that back. So I definitely have a soft spot for Oman.
The desert heat, I just not a desert heat person. I lived in Phoenix for about 2 years, and 120 is 120. I don't care what you say. And they talk about being in dry heat. I'm like, no, who cares? It's 120 degrees out.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like you open the front door of your house and it's like that moment you open the oven when you're cooking, only it doesn't stop.
Doesn't stop. And then, I grew up here in Colorado, and in the evenings in the summer times, it'll get down to the 50s and 60s, and you might have a breeze. And so you take a sweatshirt with you or a light jacket. And I can remember when I first moved to Phoenix, I, kind of had that mentality of, oh, got to grab a jacket and stuff. And
Mhm.
and then you'd open the door at 10 o'clock at night and it's still 105. And it's just like, oh, I'm throwing that on the couch before I leave. It's just,
Exactly.
it's so suffocating. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
I've lived in Florida in excessive humidity and those things, but
Mhm.
I can't take the super heat like that. That's just not
Yeah.
my ballgame.
Yeah. Where I lived in Oman, it was I want to say town, but it's I guess a city these days. It's called Sur, and it's right on the beach. And so
Okay.
it had the excessive heat. I mean, it was regularly like 40 plus degrees Celsius. But then because it was on the beach, it also had a higher degree of humidity than much of the rest of the
Uh,
country. And so it was stifling. We had the teachers all lived and worked together, and so we had an American football group that all of us would play, but you had to wait until well after sunset before, and
oh,
even
yeah.
then it was going to be still broiling hot. But so I just, my fond memories are playing football and under under the lights and under the stars.
Fantastic.
It was pretty cool.
Well, let's hop up to what you're doing today.
Mhm.
Tell me what you're up to. Uh,
Yeah. So now I am a language acquisition coach. So I've taught people how to learn languages, or I've taught people languages for probably 15 plus years. I am a certified teacher for the US, or, for state specific public schools.
mhm.
I taught English, I taught German, and I've taught French in the public schools. And then I also taught English internationally, obviously. I still do some of that, but now I'm mostly focused on language acquisition coaching, which means that I don't necessarily teach you the language, I teach you how to learn a language. So my clients usually come to me if they're stuck and they don't know how to get started, or they don't know how to progress in
Okay.
their language learning. So I help with kind of identifying specific goals and identifying what's happening that's making them not progress or not get started.
Okay.
So particularly the getting started is often with like multilingual families who would like to raise multilingual children but
Right.
don't know how to do that. So I help them kind of make the plan, get started, and coach. We check in, coach along the way to make sure that they're meeting their goals and still feeling on track, finding their resources. And then with the ones that are stuck, it's, if you are maybe reaching a higher level of, maybe you're at, when we talk about language levels, the most commonly used one is, it's called the European Common Framework. And that's when you see like the A1, A2, B1, B2, et cetera. So the B levels are kind of intermediate. And so often people will get to like a B level and they can't figure it out. They're just spinning their wheels. They're not getting any further. Maybe they even got stuck at A levels. And so we take a look at as an educator, I help them identify who they are as a learner. Because, if you're a visual learner and you're trying to learn via audio tapes or audio CDs, whatever, MP3s, you're not going to get anywhere because that's
Mhm.
not your learning style.
Right.
Or if their goal is to learn how to read something but they're using this particular software approach or something, it's maybe not meshing. So I help them identify those roadblocks, those disconnects where it's not working out, and then push past it. So because I'm not teaching language, I can really work with any language. If you're learning um, Zulu, for
Yeah.
example, I can help with that because it's not so much about my ability to know the language. It does help that I have learned so many languages myself,
Mhm.
because each language also does kind of have some uniqueness to it. And the different languages might be better served learning them in different ways. Um, so, I just kind of help them tailor that their learning experience to their ultimate goal and then achieve that goal. So it's under the umbrella of goal achievement is my main coaching.
Okay. So I have a cousin. When he raised his kids, he and his wife spoke very, very fluent Spanish.
Cool.
And so they were raising their kids to where they only spoke Spanish to them at home, and then they
Hmm.
would send them off to school, and they knew English also. So, it
Hmm.
was kind of one of those things.
Yeah.
And you see that, on a frequent basis that
Hmm.
people are doing that. What's the biggest challenge when you're working with a family that wants to have multiple languages in their home?
Hmm. Um, mindset, I would say.
Okay.
The availability of the internet is brilliant, but it's also a little bit of a burden because there's so many articles, so many experts telling you exactly how to do something and how not to do something.
Sure.
And all of them, to get, because it's essentially clickbait.
Yeah.
All of the titles say this is the only way, or you must do it this way.
Yeah.
And that's, new parents in particular, we're kind of a fragile species. And so when people are telling you that your child's best interest will only be met if you do this specific thing, it can be very
Exactly.
overwhelming.
Right.
So that's one of the things that I like to focus on is that mindset of there is no perfect way. And if it feels right to you, then that's great. So I I like to focus a lot on mindset, and then helping identify. There are a lot of different approaches. So most people will hear that there's, well, two main ones. There's the one person, one language, in which one parent speaks one language and another parent speaks another language, and they stick to that. There's also situational, which it sounds kind of like your family member did, where at home with the family, they spoke one language, in the community, they spoke another. And those are two very common ones, but they're not the only ones. And you don't necessarily have to even stick with one. You don't have to stick with one your entire, your child's entire childhood.
Mm-hmm.
You can develop as the situation changes. So I would say just first getting the mindset, because it can be really discouraging if you feel like, oh, I'm not doing this correctly, and you want to give up. Language learning is not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Okay.
And so that's the biggest challenge, is you have to commit to it for a long time.
So, question for you. How are you delivering your teaching and coaching now? Is that self-service with courses online? Is it webinars? Is it individual, in person? How's that working for you?
Yeah, so I do, right at the moment, I do workshops periodically. Those are between 2 and 4 hours, depending on the subject. And we cover things ranging from how to start as a multilingual parent, how
Mm-hmm.
to do, immersion without traveling, that sort of thing. And then I also do one-on-one coaching.
Okay, cool. Now, do you have openings that people can work with you
Yeah.
on your classes then?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find scheduling on polyglot and tot.com.
Okay, fantastic. Um, Looking back, all the things that you've done, would you do anything different than your journey that you've been on?
Oh, let's see. I think I would have had, like, if I could go back as myself and talk to my teenage self, I would have just really encouraged myself to have a lot more confidence, be more daring. I have suffered from anxiety periodically through life. And so kind of the thing that has helped me most is I do periodic challenges where I have to do one thing a week that truly scares me, to kind of confront that. And so I'm just starting that again because I found myself in a period of anxiety lately. And yeah, so I would just go back and tell myself to just, take the leap, go do whatever sets you on fire, go do it, find out more about it.
It's funny. I interviewed a lady. Her name is Erin Thomas,
Hmm.
and she proclaims to be a professional leaper because she's just done so many things. And
Yeah.
she had a mantra, much like you, that is, hey, if you gonna feel like it, just go jump and do it. So that's
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
what's next? What's on the horizon next for you?
Hmm. So, I stopped planning for a little while because, as we all know, things have been uncertain recently, and we've all had to do a lot of pivoting. I was a full-time teacher instructor at a college. Due to shifts in education, that's kind of changing. So we all have to pivot right now. But I'm hoping that the next thing is, my daughter was born in January of 2020. I immediately applied for her passport because I wanted her, I was doing travel blogging. I wanted her to experience that as well. And then, of course, we've all sat tight for the last year and a half. So my next goal is hopefully to be able to get back on the road. And, she's now 17 months old. I would love for her to be able to start seeing the world a little bit as much as is safe and advisable for everyone. So probably traveling, and then just continuing to work with languages. I am hoping to add a few more languages in the next year. So I'll start with adding languages and traveling and just being there for my daughter.
Okay, so one more reflective question before we wrap up. Looking back over your journey, okay,
Mm-hmm.
is there one key pivot point that really made a big difference in your life?
Mm-hmm. Oh, great question. Um,
Because we all go through all kinds of pivot points, right?
yeah,
But a lot of times there's one really cataclysmic one that is a big catalyst.
yeah,
So is there one looking back?
yeah. I would say, so around 2012, 2013, I
Mm-hmm.
had gotten into what would be considered a very expected life, particularly growing up, in a Southern community. I had done exactly as expected. I went to college to get my MRS. I was married, shortly after college, and kind of settled into that routine of expectation, and I was unsatisfied. And so I think that the important thing was that I pivoted at that moment. I changed directions. I kind of did what I needed to do, and I started to follow, as we said, follow those leaps.
Yeah.
And so that's when I started. I got back into acting, and I was in my early 30s at that point, so there was a lot of naysayers, like, you're too old for this. But at that point, I actually I had a great time with it. And it became something bigger than I really anticipated. I was a regular on a web series for a while. I was doing just a lot of work with that and had a wonderful time. And that gave me the confidence to then start doing the other things, like that's when I took the internship in Nepal. And I think at that time I also was working with a nonprofit, and we went to Africa. We went to Kenya to do some research. So I think kind of taking those big leaps and just going way outside of my norm and breaking that routine, it just woke me up. It just reminded me that there's so much life to live, and I really hold the cards. I have the control. I can decide what comes next. If I am ready to be in a settled routine, fantastic, but I don't have to be.
It's nice. So I love this old quote, and it's, "Not all who wander are lost."
Yes.
And that was, J.R. Tolkien. And so
Mhm.
I just love that because, there's a lot of us out there who, have so many interests and wanted to be diverse. And the
Mhm.
idea of working in an office endlessly, that's just not interesting. And so
Exactly.
kind of crazy there.
Yeah.
All right, so I have one last question as we wrap up the episode here today.
Mhm.
In Western cultures, we all have this thing called a bucket list.
Mhm.
And so those are things we want to do before our time on Earth is done. But there's
Mhm.
always an opposite to everything in the universe. Okay.
Mhm.
That opposite list is, now yours is going to be interesting because you've done a lot of different things. That opposite list are things you have no interest in ever doing or don't want to do again. Okay.
Mhm.
Now that list rhymes with bucket and starts with an F. Okay. But we're not going to use that. In fact,
Right.
I actually interviewed the bucket list guy, Trav Bell, down in Melbourne. Great
Oh,
guy.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So listen to that one. But what might be an item or two that would be on your F it
Uh-huh.
list? And I'll give you a couple examples that would be on mine. Okay.
Mhm.
I'm never going to have a collection of pet snakes. Not going to happen. Okay.
Yeah.
Not eating sardines or caviar. I've kind
Mhm.
of been there, done that. And then this is the biggest one that I've ever had. And maybe I just did it wrong, but I will never, ever again participate in a Lakota Sioux sweat lodge. The concept of excessive heat, excessive humidity, and excessive drumming, chanting, and a little slice of nudity. No, I'm just not doing that.
Not your scene, eh?
Yeah, not my scene. So what might be an item or two that's on Sarah's F-it list?
Yeah. Um, so I would say that in the sense of the never again, I would say the dirt cheap travel.
Okay,
Been there, done that a ton. And I'm happy to, on the Choose Your Life Adventure website, I absolutely will tell others how to do the dirt cheap travel.
sure.
Um, but I've done it, and I'm too old for that stuff anymore. So
Sure. Yeah.
yeah, I'm not going to do the, cram everyone onto a $20 flight, stay
Yeah.
in the hostel with, I've stayed in some wonderful hostels even as an adult, but, crammed into their 8 in a room with a bunch of 19-year-old Brits on their gap year. We're done with that. So I would say that. I would say, it's difficult because I have, like I said, the fear, the no fear list of, if it's something scares me, I have to go do it.
Right.
But the one thing I'm not going to put on that is bungee jump. I would do skydiving, but for some reason, bungee jump, it's not worth it. I'm not interested. I don't have anything to prove. So yeah.
Yeah, I think being a human yo-yo doesn't sound any good to me.
Right, exactly.
Up and down until you stop. No, thank you.
Not interesting.
Not interesting.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for coming on and sharing your story, and
thanks for having me.
Sharing how people can. I think what's great is, there's a gazillion of these apps out there and programs and that kinds of stuff teach you a language, right? But you go this extra step of helping people understand how to learn a language, which is completely different.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a different approach. So thank you for coming on, and we'll call this a wrap for this episode today.
Thank you.
Will always remember to ask you to stop by the rexandrewshow.com, the website for the show, because when we do our interviews, we only touch just a little bit in our guests' lives. I mean, we have only a certain amount of time. We sort of allot for these. So there's bios there, links to their assets and those types of things. So stop by the show, look for Sarah, plus over 140 some odd different folks that are out there. So please stop by and take a look. A lot of interesting people. And then we have a large list that are coming up there. So we always have a lineup of great people. So until next time, I want to say the 3 things that one of them has been influenced because of our recent pandemic is be safe, but be bold and make it a great day.